let's head
Yeah.
on over to sleeping kids.
Yeah.
This was
That's a big
something
one.
I don't have kids, so I don't know. I don't see those behavioral deals. You touched on it a little bit before we started recording. My friends here, one of their kids, their youngest, had her tonsils taken out, and she wakes up in the
Yeah.
morning, has a smile on her face, and says that she's happy, and she says she's in a good. She's like, I'm actually in a good mood. Both her parents, both my friends were like that. That never used to happen. She always used to be crabby waking up and all that. So
Mhm.
I guess I'll just let's talk about sleep with kids, and I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, I mean this is a big one, and the way I kind of fell into this whole deal is I have three boys. My oldest right now is 15, and I have 13-year-old twin boys. When my twins were young, they were born premature. They were 9 weeks early, so they suffered from a lot of complications right from the get go. As they started to kind of get a little bit older, whenever we ran up against an issue, it was always the same kind of story. Well, they're premature, they'll grow out of it. They're premature, this happens, they'll grow out of it, and
Yep.
like they weren't really on schedule with anything. I mean, they were small for their age, their coordination wasn't great, their language wasn't coming along. They had their own little language, which, when you don't have twins, everyone's like, oh, that's so cute, which it kind of is. Not going to lie, it's neat when they have this little blah, 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 and they're just talking to each other, having a whole conversation. But we always had them on antibiotics for something. They always had ear infections. It was just constantly something. So my wife and I both worked in healthcare. My wife does CAT scans. She's been doing radiology for 25 years now, and I worked in sleep medicine. And we just couldn't figure out, like, why is this such a problem? One night I was putting away clothes, putting laundry away in the room, and I just happened to notice Stone, one of my boys, he was snoring really bad. I'm like, geez. I'm like, kids aren't supposed to snore. So if your kid, like adolescent or toddler or anything, if they're snoring, it's already bad news, because their airways are already easily compromised. So if they're snoring, there's something going on.
Yeah.
But I started hearing, I'm like, man, that's not good. So I went over and I stood next to his crib. It was like a crib bed thing, See, I think he was 3 at the time. I stood there and I'm watching him, and sure as hell, he stopped breathing. I'm like, holy crap. And I counted it off because from a clinical standpoint, in order for it to count as an apnea, it has to last for 10 seconds or longer. So you have to have a pause of breathing for 10 seconds or greater, right? So I immediately start counting it off. I'm like, man, 15 seconds before he starts breathing again. I was like, geez. I'm like, all right. So
It was 15
15
seconds.
seconds. Yeah. So he does it again. So I start counting it off. Now it's 25 seconds. I'm like, man. So again, within a few more minutes, does it again. So now I'm counting it off. Finally, I'm done counting. I'm like, this is it. He's got sleep apnea. I'm like, son of a bitch. Now, the doctors always would comment on the size of his tonsils. Any doctor he saw, they were like, wow, this kid's got some good tonsils on it, which, looking back on it, pisses me off because they all saw it, right?
They didn't do
And
anything about it.
no one caught it, right? So, after this I come up upon this. Now, to give a little bit of a backstory, my wife and her family all have sleep apnea. Okay, so it's a hereditary thing. So it does pass down generation to generation, right? So, I mean, looking at me, I got a big schnozola, man. I got a big nose because my dad had a big nose, because my grandfather had a big nose, right? So it's the same thing with parts of the body you can't see, like your tonsils, your airway, your tongue, your uvula. Like these are traits that are handed down from our parents, right? So there's history there, So I call the pediatrician, tell him what's going on, and I videotaped it. So I actually showed him the video, which typically, if a kid's going to have tonsils taken out, very frequently the doctor will request a sleep study, a pediatric sleep study before the tonsillectomy. Not all the time, but sometimes they will, just to kind of rule it out. They didn't, because they saw the video, they knew damn well he had it. So right into surgery. So they had their tonsils and adenoids removed. We weren't going to mess around with whether the other one, because he had some issues too, but they weren't as evident. Did tonsillectomy, adenoidectomy, and they ended up putting tubes in their ears because they were down to 10% of their hearing from all the ear infections. They couldn't hear anything. So took them to an audiologist and did an ear study, like a hearing test on them, and they were down between 10 and 15% of their hearing. So their little language that they were using. So if this is what you heard when I was talking to you, because they were so muffled. That's what they were repeating. That was their secret language. You know what I mean? So they were just mumbling because that's what they were hearing us do. They were mimicking the mumble, right? So all
Holy
this, I
smokes.
was so angry that I didn't catch this, but I just didn't, I just
Right.
wasn't seeing it. So we get them taken care of. I mean, it was hell. 6 surgeries on 2 kids in one day. It was pretty miserable as far as recovery standpoint. But honestly, I'd do it 1,000 times over because of the result.
Yeah.
Within 6 months, their language skills were on point. They had grown dramatically in body mass. Their balance was better. Their hand-eye coordination was better. They were caught up in literally 6 months, what they were missing out for the last 4 years. And it was tremendous change in just doing that.
So they were 4 years old when
They
they
were
had
4
this
years
done?
old when they had the surgery. Yeah, I caught
Okay.
it when they were like 3 going on 4, and they were 4 when they had the surgery.
Okay.
And it was a dramatic change, like to the point where the daycare we were sending our kids to, they were concerned. They were like, listen, your kids, they don't listen. They get crazy. They run around like crazy. They're, wild. And I'm like, they're kids. That was my response. Of course, it's my kid. It's not my kid. My kid's not a bad kid, just like everybody says, right? But, as I'm starting to discover all this stuff, I start realizing, I'm like, yeah, they're right. But if you notice, if you have kids, when kids start to get tired, they're like, they're running around, and then they face plant and they're out for a nap. When we get tired, we want to immediately sit down and rest. When kids get fatigued, it's opposite. They become very hyperactive. So when the sleep apnea was causing them to have all these issues, unfortunately, one of the symptoms that almost mirror sleep apnea is ADHD. So the point that the daycare was getting at was, we think your kids have ADHD because of the way they're acting, because it was classic symptoms, right? But they were also classic symptoms of a kid with sleep disordered breathing. But that's almost never spoken about. There's very little awareness of it. There's very little information on it. So they were convinced, and I'm like, I don't know. They're like, we need to have them seen by a specialist. And I'm like, hold on a minute, I'm not buying it. And then we find out, of course, that they have this sleep disorder. So very frequently we see kids who are labeled with ADHD, and they don't have ADHD. They have the symptoms of ADHD, but then we're going to put them on a medication that is 9 times out of 10 a stimulant. That's usually what they use to treat kids with ADHD. Now, I'm not saying ADHD doesn't exist. It's definitely a thing. However, I think it's overused, I think, or overdiagnosed without any kind of back work, right? Like no screening, because there was no, like, let's just see if there's something else here. It was immediately like, well, they're ADHD, we got to get them medicated. And I was like, whoa, hold on a minute, and then when I again come to find that was not even close to the case, I was a little animated. Now I went and had a conversation with the owner of not as a complaint, but as of an awareness perspective. Like, listen, this is what I found. I don't know if you guys are even aware that this is a thing. And of course they weren't. So it was a great conversation with them, and to bring some awareness to that, like, hey, keep an eye on these kids, because you might be able to pick something up. Because a lot of kids that go through life with ADHD, with sleep apnea, and it's not caught, it really, really harms them from a developmental, like a mental perspective, physical development, all that stuff. That's like, we're going back to like HGH, human growth hormone, right? When you have little kids, they're growing at an enormously rapid rate when they're kids, so they need a lot more of that HGH than I would as a 40-something-year-old man. So their sleep architecture is completely different. So when you're compromising that HGH, they're not growing properly. So they can't learn. That offline learning becomes compromised. Their muscle mass becomes compromised, their balance becomes compromised. So all these things become these massive issues that go unchecked and almost misdiagnosed by putting them on, a medication that's a stimulant that's going to compromise what little sleep they are getting, and it's going to make it worse.
It's just
So it's just
compounding
gonna, and the problem that we have in the medical field is the average, I think it's something ridiculous, like the average amount of time a med student gets in sleep is like 2 hours in their entire medical school, 2 hours on sleep. A friend of mine went to school to be an orthopedic surgeon, and I talked to him after he graduated. And one of the questions I asked him was, how much time did they spend talking about sleep? He goes, well, I had to learn the sleep stages in my psych class. And that was it. Like,
Yep.
you know, when your patient spends a third of their life doing something, you should probably know a little bit about it. Right. And
Right.
it's not their fault. It's to no fault of their own. It's just how the
it's set up.
medical
And
field. Yeah.
and we didn't talk about it at all in PT school. We
Right.
maybe touch on it for a PowerPoint, right? But we didn't.
Sure.
I don't hardly ever remember talking about it. Any of the sleep
Yeah.
stuff that I know now is from continuing education stuff and talking with
Yeah.
you. And we talked about it in one of the earlier episodes. Is like you're supposed to spend a third of your life, and we're just. I mean, PTs. We are encompassing the whole body, right? Like we're not just looking at one
Right.
specific part that someone has going on. Like we need to look at the body from the 30,000 foot view. And that's what I do with one of my programs with the outdoor athlete program is like we slow things down and we zoom way out to the 30,000 foot view. And then we start to attack different aspects of why someone's life is not where they want it to be, and why their like mountain performance is not where they want it to be too.
Mm-hmm.
But sleep is like not talked about often enough. It's never covered enough.
No, not even close.
It's something I thought you were going to take this average time, so I'll throw another average time out there. The average time spent with an MD in America now, medical doctor, primary care, specialist, like some sort of orthopedic surgeon. The average time is 5 to 7 minutes.
Yeah,
there's absolutely no way that you can get to the root cause of something. You have enough time to talk to the nurse that comes in first, or the tech that comes in first, tell them a little bit about what's going on. And then they're going to go tell the MD what's going on in between all the 15 other patients that they're seeing at the same time. Yeah. You have the telephone game, right? From what you told the tech or the nurse to what that nurse or tech tells the MD. And then the MD's got to come back and repeat what they told them. So there's this whole circle of communication. And then you only are able to do that in 5 to 7 minutes. Like you don't have time to get to the root of the cause.
Yeah. I mean, when you combine a sedentary lifestyle with bad diet and, you know, a compressed sleep schedule, you're asking for it, man. You're asking for it. You know, it's bad news. And from another perspective, when you talk about like healthcare and healthcare workers and stuff, I mean, look at the kind of shifts that we put people through. Nurses, phlebotomists, look at residents. Residents, I mean, 30-hour shifts. What the hell are they thinking? I mean, have you ever been to an ICU? Have you ever been inside of an ICU before?
Yeah, I've worked in one.
So, yeah. So how bright is it in an ICU? How many dings and dongs and shit going off left and right? Like these are the people who need sleep. These patients need to sleep the most. Yet it's bright. There's people talking constantly. There's very little opportunity to rest or sleep. Never mind get good quality sleep. So you're kind of cutting their nose to spite their face, like right out of the gate. Medical residents, you know, they're working 30-hour shifts. I think the stat was something like over 400% more likely to make a poor diagnosis or some sort of error with, 30 hours of sleep or 30 hours of work with no sleep. Yeah. And then, you get into a car to go home and you're like 180% more likely to get into a car accident and go right back to the place you just left. You know what I mean?
Except for you're on the other side of the freaking curtain.
Yeah. And you're hoping the guy that's taking care of you didn't just stay awake for 28 hours. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's this vicious cycle.
If there's one good thing that came from COVID, it's the fact that hospitals shut down visitors for a while, because in the hospital, people need to sleep. Like moms that just had their kid, they need to sleep. It's nice to go see the newborn, right? Your grandkid or your new niece or nephew, but moms need to sleep. When they get home, they need to sleep. Like allow that process to happen, and then you can go visit. Like the kid is not going to know whether you met him or not within the first week or so, but those parents are sure going to feel that the lack of sleep, right? Someone getting better in the hospital, we're getting away from the kids a little bit, but someone in the hospital, like it's nice to go visit them, but coordinate with the people that are going to try to go visit. Don't call the patient and try and have them coordinate everything. They're trying to rest. Like there is something wrong with them. They need to sleep. I think some hospitals are also getting away from the 2-hour checks at night too. Instead of going in to wake them up, they go in, check them out. Like, is their chest rising and falling? Okay, let's let them sleep, which is good.
Yeah.
because you got to stop interrupting their sleep every 2 hours. Like, let them sleep if they're sleeping.
Sure. I mean, and there's lots of advantages, like increases in technology with like even telemetry units. They have
Mhm.
wireless telemetry monitors now. So you don't have to go in and check anything. It's all telling you from outside the room, basically what you need to know,
Right.
for the most part. I mean, I get if you're trying to get blood pressures or there's a special case of a patient that you need to follow up on for, if you're tracking how much they're voiding or something. I don't know. There's things with suction tubes from surgeries and stuff, but for the most part, if you're there for a standard illness, you need sleep. And if you're
Yeah.
getting woken up all the time, it's gonna be a rough one.
Yeah.
Talking about go back to kids, in the NICUs, they stopped leaving the lights on all night just because of that. The babies were getting out of the NICU a lot faster. Their oxygen generation was much better. They're putting on weight faster, because they turned lights out. It's crazy, because they
Yeah.
would always have the lights on in there so they can keep track of everybody. But once they started cutting that down and turning lights out for half the day, then these kids were getting better faster and they were discharging them quicker. It's amazing that we're as far as we are in the medical world, with technology, but we're just so far behind the curve when it comes to how we practice it and how we
Yeah.
screen for stuff. It blows
Yeah.
my mind.
So, and that kind
But
of leads me to my next couple questions. Like, first one, how young is too young to have someone's tonsils removed? My friends of mine, their daughter's 2, about to be 3, and I think a couple months. So she's probably about 2.5, 2 3/4 when she had them
mhm.
removed. Like, what is the youngest that a kid can have their tonsils removed? And then 2, what are the steps that a parent should take to first see if their child needs it? Like, should they stay up at night and listen to their kid sleep? Like, is that one of the steps? Like, how do they go about getting their kid checked out to see if they need to get their tonsils removed or see if they have a sleep issue?
The first part, I'm not 100% certain. I think 24 months from what I understand, but I could be mistaken. That could have changed.
Okay.
But it's pretty young. I mean, they can do it pretty young. But again, that's going to be more of a pediatrician question, or a pediatric ENT, ear, nose, and throat specialist.
Yep.
But if your kids are starting to demonstrate these behaviors, sometimes kids are just in a bad mood, and that's it. But if it's a consistent thing all the time, where they don't want to listen, they're distracted all the time, they can't focus, they're not advancing. If your pediatrician says they're a little bit behind the curve, as they call it, it doesn't hurt to request a meeting with an ENT, or a specialist, a sleep specialist, a pediatric sleep specialist, mind you, because they're different. Pediatric
Yeah.
sleep is way different than adult sleep. I mean, by
Okay.
miles. I've done pediatric sleep for a stint, but unfortunately, I did it in a lab that had no business doing pediatrics. Don't get me wrong; I learned a tremendous amount, but we weren't prepared for it. We weren't set up for it. So there are some great medical facilities out there that specialize in pediatric stuff, and that's what I would lean into. So again, request that specifically, a pediatric sleep specialist. You might have to travel. Where I live right now, there's not really anything good around here. So you might have to travel 2 hours or 3 hours to get to Philly or to get to Hershey or something like that. But it's worth it. It's way worth it. If your kid does have an issue, you want the right people, one,
Yep.
identifying it, but two, treating it.
Yep.
So that would be my suggestion, is if somebody, the mere suggestion of ADHD, immediately request a referral to a sleep specialist, because you want to rule that out. Is it ADHD? Maybe, but if you don't rule out other things that can really make a dramatic difference in that child's development, you can't skip it. You
Yeah.
gotta look into it. And unfortunately, that kind of falls on the parents anymore. Like you said, to kind of go in and watch them sleep. If you don't really know what you're looking for, I mean, sometimes it's blatantly obvious. You know what I mean? You're like, holy crap, the kid's not breathing. That's a problem. But there's also there's another event called a hypopnea versus an apnea. And it's a lesser version of an apnea. So you don't completely stop breathing. Your breathing becomes very shallow, but it still has the same impact on your sleep. It still causes brain arousal, still causes fragmentation from sleep. So there's all these similar kind of deficits, but it's harder to pick up just by watching a patient. So you need a sleep study to identify that, because they'll measure, thoracic movement, they do all that stuff. So they can actually break it down to percentages and really get a good look at what's going on. The trick is it takes a special person to do a sleep study on a kid, because you're putting a lot of electrodes. Go on Google and Google images of a PSG sleep diagnostic study or whatever. And man, it'll blow your mind, the amount of stickers and wires and electrodes that you have to put on a patient. It almost seems ridiculous, but it's very, very effective and efficient. I mean, you can't go wrong. The computer doesn't lie, you know? Right. So when you're collecting that data properly, you can get a really good diagnosis. But trying to talk a 4-year-old into letting you put a bunch of wires on them, I tell you, I used to leave with more electrodes than the kid had on, because it was like a 1-for-1 deal. You know, I'd be like, okay, you put one on my face, I put one on your face. You put one on my cheek, I put one on yours. And that was the only way you could talk them into it. You know, I'd come out of the room and the other techs are looking at me like, what the hell happened to you? I'm like, I made it happen. You know? Right. So don't hate on it, you know, but
no, absolutely not. You do what you got to do.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, parents are sometimes tougher than the kids. All due respect to the parents out there, but when your kid's involved, you know, that mama bear comes out, man. It's tough. It's tough to explain to someone you're not trying to hurt their kid. You're trying to help them. But, you know, so it takes a kind of a special individual to be able to communicate that and articulate what's going on without offending anyone. It's a challenge for sure. Yeah. But that's why you want to go to a pediatric sleep specialist, because they're prepared for all that.
Yeah. Is there something that the parents can do to help prep themselves and the kid prior to going to that, if that's the route that they're taking?
Research, and from good sources. You don't want to ask your neighbor. You don't want to go into a chat room. You want to go to like the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, something along those lines. You want to, like, there's all sorts of resources, like good, reliable resources out there, but look into it and start to understand some of the terminology even, you know, so that you understand what they're talking about. Because a lot of times, especially with adults as well, is, you know, your general practitioner sees you and says, hey, you know, I think you need a sleep study. See Janet on the way out. She'll get you set up. And that's as much as you know before you get to the sleep lab. Right. So as an adult, you're walking into a laboratory going, wait a minute, what are you doing? You're putting what on me? Where? You know, and
your
they have
blood
no
pressure's
clue.
up. You're anxious, so that just you're set up for failure before you even walk through those damn doors.
And that makes the technologist's job more difficult, because now, this is one thing where I kind of always excelled, was communication with patients, because before, I was lucky to be in a facility that allowed for that. So I had time to sit down before we did anything, before they even filled out their paperwork. I would sit down and explain, just like I kind of explained to you, like what sleep apnea is, how it impacts you, what we can do to kind of help fix it and make these things better. And I start to learn how to talk to people. Like, they'll start to see these little facial cues when you bring up high blood pressure, or you bring up fatigue, or they're like, oh my God, you're talking about me. I'm like, yeah, I know, because you're one of many. You know what I mean? You're not alone. Right. There's a lot of people who face the same thing, but you start to identify with them, and they're more on your side versus you just trying to, you know, get a bunch of money out of their insurance company like it's some kind of scam, you know?
Right.
But, you know,
just taking that time on the front end to explain it, to make them, because when people understand, or when people feel like you're trying to help them understand, that immediately eases things.
Sure, they can easily get on board.
Yep. It's a lot easier because they feel like what you just said. It doesn't feel like a scam, like you're just trying to take their money from insurance, right?
Yeah. Another ball dropped in the great healthcare community, you know.
Yeah.
No, and I don't want to sound like a hater. I don't, but you know, I've seen so many instances where it's like, man, what a shame. We could really help somebody here, and it's just we're hurting them more than we're helping them sometimes.
Right. You know? Oh yeah. No, I agree 100%, and that's kind of what started this business too, is not taking insurance. Like, I have to play by the state rules, but I don't have to play by insurance rules. Right. Insurance is a heck of a lot harder to deal with than state. As far as parents doing research, though, generally like .edu and .org are sites that are safe to get stuff from. .coms, forums. People who post on forums either had one hell of a great experience, or just the absolute worst experience that you could possibly have. And so you're going to get both ends of the spectrum. And I mean, it's kind of like politics, right? You hear from the extreme one side and the extreme the other, and then there's the
Yeah,
majority of the people that are right in the middle. So it's kind of like that, where don't try to uh, white out the extreme noise on that stuff.
yeah,
Focus on the .org, .org, and then the .edu stuff. And honestly, if you have questions too, like get a hold of the sleep lab or get a hold of the primary or the person that referred you and ask them for resources. Or even before you go into the appointment, like ask them what resources can I find to help better prepare for this. So that way my kid or myself is better mentally prepared to go into this. So that way it's not a totally foreign and novel experience like we have in a halfway idea of what's going to happen.
right. I mean, and honestly, I mean, you can go online to the website of a local sleep lab, and generally most sleep labs will have like a frequently asked question column or, section on their
Yeah.
website to kind of help steer you into the direction of what do you need to bring with you to what is sleep apnea, stuff like that. So, and any lab worth their salt is going to have some sort of informational segment on their website to kind of help you figure that out. And they'll usually will also have links, like hyperlinks, that you can click on to go to the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, or the Sleep Apnea Association. There's all these different groups out there that can provide you with great resources, and they're usually linked up on those sites. So
Yep.
it's a great place to start for sure. But yeah, I mean, learn a little bit about what's going on. 50 years ago, it was real easy to just say, well, the doctor said so, that's what we're going to do.
Yeah. Wait.
Unfortunately, that's not the case anymore. You kind of have to question things, not to be a
Yeah.
pain in the ass, but you
Yeah.
got to kind of
And
question things.
and you're not even bashing MDs. Like it's just
No,
it's good to do your research because as you know, you're a healthcare professional, I'm a healthcare professional. We can't feel the things that you're feeling. We can
right,
only know what you tell us. And then we can do
right,
some tests and measures to either rule in or rule out. But 80 to 85% of a PT's diagnosis comes from straight from the patient's mouth, what they tell us. If
sure,
we don't if we don't do a good enough job doing the subjective interview, we're not going to know enough. Two, if like say the MD 5 to 7 minutes, that's just not enough time to really dive into that amount of information that's needed, right? So doing your own research and with reliable sources, so that way you're getting credible information, you're not psyching yourself out. That there's nothing wrong with that. You're not going against what the doctor's saying. You're just trying to be more informed. The more informed someone is, the quicker you're going to get to the root of the problem.
100%. Yeah, yeah. So you
Yeah.
kind of have to become part of the process now.
Yep.
You used to be able to just sit back and ride the wave of whatever was happening, but you just can't really do that anymore.
No.
And again, it comes down to, like, a lot of the physicians are so taxed with time and patient load, and their own personal issues. I mean, they're not immune to depression, and
Yeah.
they're not immune to personal issues and family stuff. And so they got a lot of stuff going on too. So
Yeah.
to just throw your hands up and let somebody else make decisions that are super important to your well-being is it's just not the same anymore.
Yep.
you
Yeah.
know
You've got to take ownership of your health.
and that's with any aspect of it, not just sleep. Like with
Yep.
diet, with exercise, you don't want to overdo it with exercise, otherwise they'll be coming to see Dr. Rob real quick. You know what I
Right.
mean? But or you don't want to underdo it, or do something that's not going to help you. There's a lot of things that you can do wrong, but there's a lot of things you can do right if you take the time to kind of look into it and discover what those right things are.
Yep. Yep. All right, man. So let's go some closing stuff here. I guess was there anything else on kids specifically that you wanted to talk about?
Not really. I don't want to get too deep into it because it gets into like sleep architecture and all that stuff. I mean, that's not really
I,
vital. What's vital is paying attention. You know what I mean? Paying attention and questioning. If your kids are having a challenge, don't be afraid to call the doctor. If you're not
yeah.
sure, call them. That's what they're there for. You know what I
Yep.
mean? You might end up seeing a PA or something like that instead of a doctor, but who cares? You're seeing somebody, and you're making it known that there's
Yep.
something not right. And
Yep.
if you're not certain that they're correct, don't be afraid to say so. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Like I said, you don't want your kids on unnecessary medications, period. But you definitely don't want them on a medication that's going to have a drastically negative impact on them because it was the wrong
Right.
diagnosis. And again, not the fault of the physicians. Again, I'm not trying to say doctors suck or they're bad at their job. It's just not their fault. They just don't have that specialty knowledge of it to say, hey, let's look outside the box a little bit. It's
Right.
real easy to break out the prescription pad, and there's a lot of that, and
Yep.
it's just, you see it all over television all the time. It's crazy.
What do you say for like a bedtime routine? Is that kind of the sleep architecture? Like a brief, someone's having trouble with their kids getting them to bed, like they're how should someone structure their bedtime routine for their kid? Because ultimately, like kids rely on us. We have to provide that structure, right? In order for them to eventually follow
Mhm.
that. They're not going to do it on their own. Kids are going to be kids. What should someone's sleep structure look like for their kid?
Do Benadryl before nap time. No, I'm joking.
But
No,
seriously,
yeah. No, it's again, that comes down to consistency. Have a routine and make it fun. Bedtime stories are always a big thing. I used to read to the kids all the time. We used to do wrestling matches because I have three boys. So, if it was getting close to bedtime, I'd start roaring like a crazy person, and they knew it was coming. So they'd all run into the one room, and we'd all wrestle on the bed, and I'd tire them out a little bit. I'd tire myself out probably a little bit more than them. It was a consistent thing, and you start to build these cognitive behaviors with them, and they know that this signals, even though they don't realize it signals bedtime, but there's certain acts that you can do, certain things, read like bedtime stories, or a lot of people sit down and watch a television show at the end of the day. We'll watch a cartoon together, just to kind of, that signals the beginning of bedtime. So having some sort of structured routine will help. And if that doesn't help, I mean, you can again talk to a pediatrician about another method of building some sort of behavioral tactic together. They'd have some good information for you as well. But I mean, I always found a lot of success with structure and routine.
yep.
Because kids, when they're younger, they need more sleep, and then it kind of drops off, or they don't need so much. Then they become teenagers and they're putting on 6 inches in a summer, so they need more sleep again. They may need, where I say, 8 hours, 7 to 8 hours is great for an adult. For my 15-year-old, he probably needs closer to 10 hours, just because of the amount of HGH that's required to put on that much body mass in a short period of time. So he
Yeah.
needs more sleep. But if you have kids that are sitting in front of their computer playing whatever, Minecraft, until 2 o'clock in the morning, then they got to get up at 6:30 to get on a school bus and go to school. That's not productive. And honestly, school, I wish we can move school start times back up to like 8 o'clock, 8:30. That would be huge, because again, kids sleep architecture. When I say sleep architecture, it's how their sleep behaves and what stages it's comprised of, and what percentage of those stages it's comprised of. So whereas an adult needs maybe 20% of their night to be delta sleep, which is that stage 3 deep sleep, my son might need 40% of his night to be that, just because of his metabolic needs, his biological needs. It's just different, right? So the architecture changes as we age. If you move school times back, they're not built to wake up at, say you got 7:30 start time, you ride the bus, you got to be up probably at maybe 5:30, 6 o'clock, so you can get up, eat breakfast, get dressed, and get to the bus stop, and then ride the bus for a half hour before you get to school. Their brains aren't built to do that. Their sleep architecture has advanced further than that at the stage of life they're in. So there's certain school districts that moved it ahead. I think it might have been Michigan that did it. There's a town in Michigan where they advanced it and did a study on it. They advanced it from, I think, 7:30 in the morning to like 8:45. So it wasn't a drastic move. And the top 10 scores, best SAT scores, were like 1280 or something like that. And again, these numbers might be a little skewed, but it's pretty close. It went from 1280 to like 1480 in 1 year, just by moving the school time by 1 hour, an hour and change.
Yeah.
There was a school in Wyoming that did the same thing. They moved it about an hour and a half. And one of the things they were finding was, this is something we could touch on, is drowsy driving. A lot of people die in drowsy driving accidents, and kids, especially teenagers driving cars, they're tired because of their sleep schedule, they're tired because of their school schedule, and they moved the time slot, and they saw a 70% decrease in car accidents in the high school. They saw
Really?
70% decrease in those car accidents from drowsy driving. I think it was when they created ABS, the analog brake systems, that was like a 25% decrease. And that was like this big deal. You advance it, an hour and a half just for the school and you drop a 70%. That's a big number.
That's a huge number. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just, but because of school buses and parents working early and school bus unions and schools, and it's hard to really change all that. You know what I mean? It's a big task to make that change. But I mean, if we're trying to educate our kids and make them the next leaders of our country, I mean, we got to take a really good look at how we're educating them and how we're, treating them in that capacity.
The whole saying back in my day, like we can put that out the window. Like research has come a long ways since back in your day. Right.
Sure.
So it's
100%.
it's definitely putting that bias behind us, that mental toughness on sleep and putting it behind us and like taking just a black and white look at it. And that kind of like going off of that with the drowsy driving, someone going into a road trip out west for an elk hunt or going anywhere for a hunt, and they have a big drive, likely is beneficial instead of getting home Thursday night and having the trip start Thursday night, like driving all night. Just wait, sleep that night, maybe that night you get 6 hours of sleep, right? It'd be ideal to get 7.5 or 8. But if you have to get up and get out to the trip, maybe get a little bit less, but go to sleep that night instead of just driving all night through the night and being totally wiped out for the trip. Is that would that be ideal?
Oh, 100%. Because the big difference between drunk driving and drowsy driving, when you're drunk, you're impaired for sure, but you still have reaction time. It might just be too slow. You know what I mean? You might not hit the brakes fast enough to not rear end the person in front of you. With drowsy driving, what happens is when you get to a certain level of fatigue, your brain starts to have what are called micro sleeps. So you're not really sleeping, like your eyes don't even close all the way, but your brain switches off for just a few seconds. Yeah. But the problem with that is when you're drunk, it's a delayed reaction. When you're tired, it's no reaction. So you're not hitting the brake at all. You know what I mean? So you can hit a person, a tree, a deer, whatever, and you're going to do a lot more damage by not even touching that brake pedal versus having a delayed reaction to braking or reacting or swerving or what have you. So there's a drastic difference between the two. People think it's worse to be drunk and driving. It's definitely not. It's worse. Really? And if you're awake for 20 hours, then you're now at the same capacity as being too drunk to drive. So 20 hours is a lot, but it happens more than you think.
Yeah.
Hell, it happened with me.
I've done it.
Yeah, I've done it. I used to do it all the time, but I used to have these transition days where I would come off my work week. So I'd work all night, get home in the morning, get the kids off to school. And instead of going to bed, because I knew I was going to have to sleep that night, I would just stay up all day and I would try and reset my sleep schedule that night. But now I'm awake for like 26, 28 hours. And then my insomnia kick in and I'd be awake all night and then have to go the whole next day to try and get some stuff done. I mean, I'd be awake for 36, 38 hours, 40 hours consistently, almost once a week.
Gosh.
It was bad. And that's where my insomnia started to really become a huge factor,
Yeah.
And, the older you are, the harder it is too. It's harder to bounce back.
Yep. You're not as adaptable. All right, man. So I guess we already talked about the clinical take home for kids here. So any books? We talked about Why We Sleep, Dr. Matthew Walker. I have not read the book. I need to read the book. Any other books or any other articles or anything like that would be good for the person who's not in healthcare, good for like the hunter or anybody who's not in healthcare, to read for more information on sleep?
Oh boy, there is a children's book about sleep. Boy, it's escaping me now. It was really good. It was kind of around kids' sleep, but it was a children's book. I think it's Sleep is for Everyone.
It's got a young girl sleeping in a hammock.
That might be it. Yeah, I think that's the one. That one is actually pretty decent. Without getting real scientific on it. You know what I mean? Yeah, the hope is people start to learn more about how important it is. If nothing else, it's they used to call it the pillars of healthcare. It's like diet, exercise, and sleep. Sleep is not a pillar. Sleep is the foundation the other two pillars stand on. And if you compromise your sleep, it's like I can't say it enough. It's not if, it's when. It's going to catch up to you. And Murphy's Law, man, it's going to catch up to you at the worst possible time. So just pay attention. Make it a point to focus on it and increase your sleep. It's hard. I get it. The term midnight is supposed to be middle of the night, but midnight is when we're checking our socials or, laying in bed watching Netflix or whatever the hell it is. I mean, that's not what we're supposed to be doing, man. Technology is advanced to where we can, but just because we can doesn't mean we should.
You should. Yep. Yep.
So
no, I hear you.
It's a hard thing to do. They're hard, habits to break, but you have to, especially if you're involved in something physical, whether you're an athlete, whether you're a backcountry hunter, whether you're just a regular old weekend warrior. Look at Mountain Archery Fest. Those guys are amazing. The whole time I was out setting targets with those guys, man, I was worried about them. I was like, these guys are grinding. Like, how much sleep are they getting? But I didn't want to be that guy. You know what I mean? Like, hey, man, Maurice, tell me how much sleep you got last night. No, he doesn't want to hear it. He knows he's got 35 targets he's got to put up in the next 2 hours. You don't want to hear it, but
yeah, I've talked to those guys about it a lot.
It's one of those things, like, you got to be careful. And if you're spending that much energy, you got to get that energy back somehow. If you're exerting that much stress on your body, you got to recuperate. The only way you're going to do that, there's no pill, there's no supplement, there's nothing else out there that's going to do it aside from a good night's sleep. And it sounds cliche and tacky, but that's the reality of it.
That's 100% it.
Yeah.
I agree. Right on, man. Well, I appreciate you hopping on. We'll have to do it again soon. And for those who are listening, go ahead and like and subscribe, and then share this with somebody. There's got to be somebody that would benefit from this. If you benefit from it, it's got to be somebody else that benefits from this too. So go 100%. Ahead and share this episode with them.
Thanks, man.